Hello out there. My name is Art Hollows and I'm the deacon here at St. James Episcopal Church. And something that I've noticed a lot of is people really don't understand what's in the pew in front of them. You ever look at that little red book called the Book of Common Prayer? But there's a wealth of information that can be very useful to us in our everyday lives. And we'll get into that later on. What I'd like to start out with, though, is just to give you a little background on the Book of Common Prayer. The Book of Common Prayer is based on what they used to call a missal. Now, during the Middle Ages, people didn't know how to read and write. They didn't know what was going on. So missals were done for the clergy to use at the altar. They were written in Latin. So later on, people had no clue what they said. In the 15th and 16th century, we started to have increase in technology, the Renaissance is going on, the Reformation is going on, and we have the creation of this device that we all know and love, the printing press. With the printing press, people were able to get a hold of copies of the books. So during the Reformation, Bibles were translated from Latin to English. Missals were translated from Latin to English. And within the church in England, they started to go ahead and print prayer books that could be used by the people. Just to give you a little background, the first one that was ever done was done in 1549 by Edward VI and the Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Cranmer. The book went through many iterations. It was revised in 1552 and 1559. Another one was written in 1604. Another one was written in 1645, and in 1662, they brought back the 1552 prayer book in England. Their final version was written in 1927, but other books have been written to augment those and update the language. For the Episcopal Church here in the United States, those books weren't totally acceptable. One of the problems was there were too many prayers to the Queen, and we didn't like the monarchy back then. So the first book of Common Prayer in the United States was published in 1789, and it was based off of the 1662 Anglican prayer book, as modified by a Scottish liturgy from 1764. And this was revised a couple of times, and we had the 1928 prayer book that many people knew and loved and were upset when we came out with the new one. The latest one we've got is in 1979. And this added a few things, like it included the daily offices, like morning prayer and evening prayer. These were things that weren't in the earlier prayer books, just the Eucharist. So these things have evolved over time and come out to be what we want them to be. This is the Book of Common Prayer that we've got today. And I'm going to go into some not great detail, but go through what is really in our Book of Common Prayer and what do we need to know to use it. There's a wealth of information in there that is helpful to us. So I'm going to start by talking about the front material. In the very front of the prayer book, the first thing that you come across on page 8 is the ratification. This prayer book had to be ratified. It had to go through our General Convention. They had to put it together. They had to say, okay, we all accept this because this defines our doctrine. Then there's a preface in there that talks about the prayer book. Then they follow up with some information concerning the services of the church. What are things we have to do for the services that the prayer book leads us through? And one of the things that I find most useful is the calendar of the church year. You can find out on any particular day who the saint should be, if there is one for that day. And this is all important things that we can use to enrich our lives and in our journey through Christ. Now, one of the things I'm not going to be doing, I am not getting into a major theological discussion of the prayer book. If you are interested in that, I have a recommendation for you. There's a book that was written back in the 1980s called Praying Shapes Believing, and it was written by Lionel Mitchell. This goes into a theological explanation of the prayer book. So it'll give you the background on why things are worded the way they are and what the scriptural basis is. Something to keep in mind. Our prayer book is based on Scripture, and that's important because that's the basis of all. Following the front information, we go into what we call the daily offices in the prayer book. Now, we have two different rites for the daily offices. We call them rites. One is rite 1, one is rite 2. Very clever. The difference between the two is not necessarily what is said, but the way it's said within the prayers. Rite 1, you're going to get the these, the thous, and the older English, more poetic language. In rite 2, what you're going to get is essentially the same thing, but in more modern English. You and your and this sort of language. And the two biggest daily offices are morning prayer and evening prayer. These are the longer prayers. They take a while. They have readings that are associated with them based on the season and the day of the week. And they're very important that way. Later on, we'll talk about where we find out what those readings are. We also have noonday prayer, which is a very short daily office. Then they have an order of worship for the evening, which would happen after evening prayer, and that's there. And then the one for the end of day is a one called Compline that we do. This is the service that they would normally have just before going to bed. So those are all services we do within the body and within the congregation at the church. Now there's a couple more. There's daily devotions in there that are for individuals and families. These are kind of abbreviated versions of evening and morning prayer. And they're very useful for your home devotions when you get around the table and you have the family there and you go through a short service that way. Then following that is something called the Great Litany, which is in the prayer book under the daily offices, but it's not really a daily office. The Great Litany that's in the prayer book is very extensive, and it was used, and it is used by and large for procession for the great Easter Vigil and that sort of thing. And it's a responsive thing between the clergy and leaders and the congregation that they have. Now, that's a very short little synopsis of what's in there. Later on, we'll get into the more important services, the Eucharist and the proper liturgies for special days. And those are the pages that, by and large, we're most familiar with. Those are the ones, as I said, we call the dirty pages, where those are the pages that are used every Sunday when we do the Eucharist. And I'm going to stop it for now. Thank you.
If you'd like to learn more about St. James or the Faith We Confess ministries, head over to thefaithweconfess.com and you can learn more about us there. If you'd like to learn more about St. James, you can head over to stjames-leesburg.org and just discover a little bit more about who we are. If you're interested in tuning in live to our services. We live stream every service on Sunday morning at 10:15 a.m. You can watch that on our Facebook page or on our YouTube channel. For more of the Faith We Confess content, feel free to head over to our YouTube channel, and you can hit the subscribe button while you're there. And please feel free to reach out to us if you have any thoughts or comments on things that we can do or things that we have done. We appreciate you so much, and we'll see you in the next one.